Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. So yes, Jazakallah khair for turning up today. This is the second day of a 2-day program. Qari Zakallah Saleem yesterday talked about the importance of writing a will from an Islamic perspective, and he mentioned some of the ayat and the ahadith which are very important in this regard. He also mentioned some of the laws of irth, or how to work out the shares. It wasn't in depth, it wasn't meant to be. It's not a detailed course. Such details such as working out how much each person should get, these aren't as important for us as the fact that you should make sure you have a will in place, because those shares, they can be worked out afterwards, after death. That's not an issue, no problem. In fact, we'll see that in your will you wouldn't actually write how much my son should get, my daughter should get, my father should get. That sort of detail you don't write in your will at all. But let me explain first of all, before I begin the program for today, is that I will discuss some of the things that were discussed yesterday, and we will then move on to how in this country one can write a will, the different ways in which you can write a will, and we will, inshallah, after that, actually give an example of writing a will. So we'll have a look at the template, how one can write a will, a basic will, which will work for a lot of people. But we'll also discuss the cases where really it's best to see a solicitor or a specialist will writer, and we'll talk about these things. We will also, inshallah, have a look at one or two of the calculators, Islamic inheritance calculators, which will work for, in terms of working out what these shares should be, so that you don't have to. Right? And they're very easy to use. The other thing is, there's going to be quite a bit on these slides, and I've printed off quite a few handouts, so that you don't have to scribble these things down and you can refer to these things later on. So I don't. Where's Zeki? If you do want a set, just raise your hand, inshallah, and Zeki will distribute them. They're for adults, obviously, not for the kids. Nothing kids will worry about.
Yeah, I love that. Go and give them one to put their hands up.
So just raise your hand.
Abdurrahim, can't take them.
So it's basically everything that's on these slides. Everything is here. Okay, so before I begin, this is a disclaimer. I am not a solicitor, as was indicated perhaps by Shaykh yesterday. I'm not a scholar. I know a bit about writing wills. I wrote my first will about 10 years ago, and I've updated it a couple of times. I'm in the process of making my most recent updates as well. So this is a reminder for me about the process. So it's been a useful thing for me to do. First of all, some of the terms involved. Okay, is it wasiyya or is it wiratha? There are two important terms. We know that in Islam, when you pass away, all your assets, everything that you own, needs to be distributed amongst certain prescribed heirs. Right, so particular members of your family, prescribed in the Quran and the Sunnah, which need to get particular shares. This is called wiratha. You have no say in this. If your wife gets a sixth, she gets a sixth. If your father, if she gets a quarter or an eighth.
There's some still waiting.
Yeah. What, you need more slides? I've run out. Don't worry about the handouts for the time being, because...
Did you print them?
Well, I can't print them now, but Feroz will send a link out to anybody, and I'll show you where you can find all of these things, the slides, all the calculators, and if you look at the last page, in fact, there are links to all these things. There's one more here, a spare one. Where was I? Yeah, so particular people get particular shares. This is in the Fiqh of Wiratha, called Wiratha, the Fiqh of inheritance. And in a Muslim country, you don't need to worry about these things. You don't have to worry about, making sure that your wealth and assets are distributed appropriately according to the Quran and the Sunnah, because usually it's enshrined in the law of the Muslim country. So if all you wanted was that your wealth gets distributed according to the rules of wiratha, then in a Muslim country, Yemen, Pakistan, I presume, and a lot of other countries, you don't have to worry about writing a will. Okay? If all you wanted was that your wealth gets distributed according to what the Quran and the Sunnah says. However, there are other people who won't be benefiting from your estate. They could be family members, or people who are not related to you, but you would like them to receive something. So they do not get prescribed shares, but you want to give them something. You can do that in Islam. It was discussed yesterday, and this is called wasiyah. Okay, not wiratha, it's called wasiyah. You basically bequeath a portion of your wealth to whoever you like, but not to those who what? Who get a fixed share. Okay, those who get fixed shares or prescribed shares, you can't say, oh, I want them to get a bit extra than what the Quran and the Sunnah says. Now we know that's clear from yesterday that that's not allowed. You can only make a wasiyah or a bequeathal or a bequest. You can only bequeath or make a wasiyah for those people who are not entitled to prescribed proportions according to the rules of wiratha. And up to how much are you allowed to give away to people who don't get prescribed shares?
1/3.
Up to 1/3. Okay, so that's, and we'll have a look at that in a short while again. In Islam, you should really write a document, for your wasiyah. Particularly if you have debts. Even if the debts are written somewhere else, because whenever you give a loan or you receive a loan, this should be written down. But it's also best to mention it in your wasiyah, okay, in case those documents get lost. And of course the hadith that's mentioned quite a lot, and Brother Firoz mentioned it again. It is the duty of a Muslim who has anything to bequeath not to let 2 nights pass without writing a will about it. Okay, so if you've got something that you want to bequeath, in other words, from your third that you're entitled to do whatever you want with, then you need to make sure you have a wasiyah written down and witnessed by 2 witnesses, 2 male witnesses in Islam. Must I make an Islamic will? Is this fard, sunnah, mubah, or what? It can be wajib. It can be a fard. Hence the importance. When can it be fard? Well, for example, when you have debts which have not been written down elsewhere. In Ayat al-Dayn, Surah Al-Baqarah, as the Shaykh mentioned yesterday, whenever you take a loan from somebody, you need to make sure that it's written down and witnessed by 2 males. If that did not take place, then you need to make sure that it's at least written down in your wasiyah. So it becomes farz upon you to have this mentioned in your will, in your wasiyah. Or when you have been entrusted with assets of others. Sometimes you are given an amana. Someone comes up to you and says, brother, can you look after this? This is my jewelry, my wealth, my car, can you keep it with you? Safekeeping. The Prophet ﷺ used to keep things, which is known as the Sadiq and Amin, the trustworthy one. Even the Kuffar used to keep items, wealth with him because of his trustworthiness. Well, if you have this, then you need to make sure that this is written down in your will. Otherwise, your heirs might come and see this wealth and think it's part of your estate and distribute it. If it's not written down, then how is it going to be sorted out? How is this going to be returned to its rightful owner? Right, so it needs to be written down. So it becomes part on you to write this down. Or you are owed assets. You might have loaned something to somebody else. Perhaps it's a bit less important, but it's still important because this wealth that you loaned out to somebody else becomes part of your estate. It becomes property of your heirs. So if you do not get this, if this money is not returned to you, your heirs will be missing out. Okay, so mention this in your will. It becomes, fun. It can be a sunnah to make a will. So, for example, okay, you don't have debts, you've not been entrusted with any wealth of anybody, you are wealthy, alhamdulillah, and you want to bequeath part of your wealth to someone other than the prescribed heirs, or to a charitable cause. Okay, it then becomes a sunnah to do this. Famous hadith talk about this, but of course you cannot do this for more than a third of your wealth. In England, it perhaps is for everyone to have a will. Okay? So we're not talking sunnah anymore, it's you need to have a will. And that's because the law of the land does not account for Islamic law. And we will see an example of this later on. What happens to your wealth if you do not have a will written down in this country which says that, I want my wealth to be distributed according to Islamic laws of wiratha. Right? If you die without a will, your wealth gets distributed by the state according to particular laws known as the laws of intestacy, not Islamic laws. So we'll have a look at this now, in fact. So the two scenarios are that when you die, you either die with a will or without a will. Okay. If you die with a will, a legally valid Islamic will, then inshallah you set it up correctly so that your assets will be distributed according to Sharia. Alhamdulillah, therefore you've got nothing to worry about. By the way, if there are any questions, then you can use slido.com, and we'll have a look at this later on. The Slido website and the number is posted around the masjid. So you die, you've got a will, alhamdulillah, no problem. What happens if you die without a legally valid Islamic will? Well, like I said, your wealth will get distributed by the state. And I'm not talking about the cash that's been hidden under the bed that your family know about, and then they will distribute that. That's fine. Okay? But your wealth in a bank account, your property, for example, which was written under your name legally, the owner, your family can't just take that house or get access to your bank account which has £100,000 in it and do what they want with it. You have to go through you have to usually apply for probate Okay, we'll have a look at that in a short while as well, in order to get control of the assets. But then you'll have to ensure that, as the executor of the will, that it's distributed according to the laws of the land, intestacy laws, or the state will do it. They will appoint somebody to take control and distribute your assets according to the laws of intestacy. And I'll give you an example here. You know, it's just one example of so many. So the laws of intestacy say that your spouse, your husband or your wife, upon your death, they will keep all your assets, including property, so money and property, up to the value of £270,000. This is what the laws of intestacy say. And all personal possessions that you own, your car, your TV, and so on, your jewellery. So your spouse will keep £270,000, if you have that, of course, and all your personal possessions, whatever their value. The remainder of your wealth, if there's anything left, is then divided into two halves. Half of that goes to your spouse, who's already got £270,000 and all your assets, your personal possessions, I should say. And the other half of the remainder is then split up equally amongst your children once they reach the age of 18. Now, this is the laws of the land. These are laws of intestacy. An example of the laws of intestacy. And obviously this goes against the Sharia. The Sharia does not say this. Sharia has particular prescribed amounts. You know, the wife gets a sixth. Sorry, not a sixth. She gets a quarter if there's no kids. She gets an eighth if there are kids. And then whatever's left over can be distributed amongst the children in the ratio of 2 to 1. You know, the sons get twice as much as the daughters. This is Islamic law. But like I said, if you don't make a will, then this is what would happen. Okay, and then, you know, whose responsibility is that? It's you. Okay, you need to make sure you've got a will in place to make sure that this does not happen. Who can make my Islamic will? How do I go about creating an Islamic will? Like I said, it depends on your circumstances. For a lot of people, you can do it yourself. And we will have a look at an example, inshallah, towards the end. We'll open up a template, what you'd have to fill in and things like this. You can just write it yourself, so long as it has certain things in there. But why risk it when you can just have, you know, use a template that's been checked by Muslim solicitors, and you can use that. So we will have a look at your do-it-yourself Islamic will, one that you can write yourself. And like I said, this is suitable for many people. In particular, those who have assets less than a particular threshold set by government. At the moment, it's £325,000. This is known as the nil band rate, which basically means if you have wealth less than that when you die, you don't have to pay inheritance tax on that. If you have wealth that's more than that, then generally speaking, you pay inheritance tax on that, on what's more than that, over that amount. So you might have, you know, £400,000. Well, you won't have to pay tax for the first £325,000, but the remaining £75,000, you have to pay a tax of, you know, 40% of that, which is a lot. Okay, so that's why it's not good to just use a basic will if you have a lot of wealth, because the state will take a big chunk of that. If you're married, then the law of this country actually says that if you write in your will that my spouse gets all of my estate, there's no inheritance tax to be paid at all. So if you have £1 million, £2 million, £10 million, and you say in your will, I want my wife or my husband to get all of this, then the state will not tax any of that, and he or she will get all of that amount. Now, of course, in Islamic law, your wife doesn't get all of it. Now, if you trust your spouse enough, your wife, your husband, and you think that the best way for you, in order to avoid inheritance tax, is that, you know, she gets it all on the condition that she then, or he then, distributes this according to Islamic law, then, you know, perhaps that's okay. But that requires a level of trust. How much do you trust your spouse? Inshallah, enough. Okay, but, you know, there are families, unfortunately, where the spouse, particularly the wife, might not have much control, is coerced, or whatever, and, you know, there might be issues, there might be problems. There are other things as well. I mean, this is very basic, what I'm saying. I mean, this threshold. It can be a lot more. Because if you were to say in your inheritance will, in your will, sorry, that, you know, it's going to be distributed according to Islamic law, and there are kids involved. Well, because there are kids involved, this threshold can be increased by another £175,000. And there are other things to, you know, that you can do in order to increase your threshold, so you don't have to pay more tax than you need to. So if you don't want to write your own will, like I said, a lot of people can write their own will. I've written my own will. I own a property, and that's another thing. Actually, it's under my name and my wife's name. That's how it was when we bought the property. So, without going into too many details, the way it's set up usually is that upon death, because it's jointly owned, the law of the land says the joint owner automatically receives the whole thing. Okay? And if it's your spouse, then obviously there's no inheritance tax to then pay on the property. But then, of course, if really Islamically you own the house, then you need to make sure that it's written down somewhere that your spouse will then have to distribute it accordingly, according to Islamic laws. There are ways to avoid tax, is my point, and solicitors know quite a lot about this. And I've mentioned, you know, some professional will writers like Islamic Finance Guru. They're not, well, they are professionals, but if your circumstance is quite complicated, then solicitors, Muslim solicitors are probably your best bet, such as I will. I'm not endorsing them, you know, they've not told me to say. I phoned them the other, well, they've called me back up, but I sent them a message just to discuss some of the things in this presentation. And they are experienced, they've got decades of experience. But let's just take, for example, Islamic Finance Guru. How much do they charge? Well, they charge nearly £100 for their standard will. And this standard will is really only beneficial if you've got assets under £325,000, which is basically the same will that we're going to look at the end. They have a more expensive will, which is a tax-efficient will, which is suitable if you've got assets less than £2 million. You may think that that's expensive, but solicitors charge quite a lot more. And really, it's not that expensive if you consider that the government will take 40% of most of this £2 million if you don't sort it out. Now, £348 is quite, it may sound quite a lot, but some charities, Islamic charities, Muslim charities, will actually, they've teamed up with Islamic Finance Group. Islamic Will, when I last checked a few days ago, they teamed up with Islamic Finance Group to offer this service for free for a short time period. I don't know for how long. I mean, it's been there for weeks, in fact. I had an email from them months ago, in fact, and this offer is still available. So if you're somebody who has assets up to £2 million and you want to make sure that you will sort it out properly, then perhaps use this link. It's obviously on the slides, and you can get Islamic Finance Guru to set up your will for free and not pay the £348. If you, alhamdulillah, are a lot wealthier, you have many properties, you've got big businesses, you've got more than £2 million worth of assets, then it's strongly advised that you get a solicitor involved, like I Will solicitor or any other Muslim solicitor, who can set up your will in such a way that you can avoid a lot of tax, perhaps remove all the tax entirely. Okay, so they've been in the business for long enough. You know, they might end up putting your wealth in a trust from which your heirs can benefit from. You know, they've got some ways around it, and it's perfectly legal. There's no, I mean, the government wants you to do this essentially. Well, they do and they don't. Obviously, if you do, then you know you're not giving them, because they earn a lot of money, multiple billions of pounds. The government does from inheritance tax every single year. But the laws are there, and all wealthy people do this, okay? Because 40% is a lot. You've already paid tax on your wealth, and the government wants to tax you once you die as well. You know, 40%. That's just crazy, isn't it? Death tax, yeah. And perhaps you want to go to a solicitor. You might not have that much wealth, but it's complicated. You share a business with people, particularly isn't your spouse, but you share a business with multiple other people. You share properties with other people. Very complicated scenario. Get solicitors involved. Seriously, however much it costs, a couple £100, £500, £700, it's worth it. It's nothing if you're wealthy anyway, so it's something that you should really do. That's in order to sort out the tax side of things. So, like I said, today we're going to be focusing on you guys writing the will. And like I said, if you've got assets less than £325,000, then it should be no problem. How to create a legal Islamic will yourself. So we're going to spend some time looking at this. We'll look at the various parts involved in writing the will. It shouldn't take you long at all. I mean, we'll quickly write one now, inshallah, well, after I've got through some of these slides, show you how straightforward it can be. According to the UK government website, and this is all available online, the government's not going to hide this, they want you to make sure you've got a will. For your will to be legally valid in the, actually the UK, I think I should have written England and Wales, because Scotland has some different laws, but anyway, you need to be 18 or over, you need to make it voluntarily, not coerced, someone forcing you to write your will and putting things in there that you don't want. Be of sound mind, not mentally incapacitated or whatever. Make it in writing. It needs to be written down, not said verbally to somebody. Although in some cases that's okay Islamically, but generally, even in Islam, you should really write it down. Sign it in the presence of 2 witnesses who are both over 18. According to English law, male or female witnesses. And you need to make sure it is signed. You sign it in front of them, and they sign it in front of you. You can't just sign it and then go to somebody and say, here's my will, can you witness it? No, they need to witness you signing it. And then they need to see you signing it. Also, you need to make sure that you make it clear in your will that you are the author, not somebody who wrote it. And and then you just signed it afterwards. You are the author of the will, and make it clear that it nullifies or cancels any previous wills that you have written, because I'm on my third will. So somewhere out there, someone's got my will from 10 years ago. So you need to make sure you date your will as well, and say clearly that it revokes all other wills that you may have written in the past. Again, this is mentioned in the template. By the way, you can ask questions at any time, inshallah. If I can answer, I will try and answer. So, date it once it's been signed by yourself and the witnesses. So, part one of writing a will yourself. Debts. Very important. It's not the thing that you write at the top, but it's one of the most important things. One of the main reasons in Islam why you need to write a wasiyah, a will, if you have debts. So these could be loans that you owe to friends or to banks, relatives, anyone, companies out there, any sort of loan. You need to make sure, not student loans by the way, we mentioned it yesterday, that student loans, according to how they're written up, they get nullified upon death anyway. So if you have a student loan that you haven't finished paying off, when you die, they cancel it. So that's nothing to worry about. Hadith that was mentioned yesterday by Qari Zakallah, which is, one cannot understress or understate the importance of mentioning your loans in a will. Hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah that the Prophet ﷺ said, نفس المؤمن معلقة بدينه حتى يقضى عنه. So your soul upon death is suspended. Perhaps it doesn't reach the heavens, because as a Muslim your soul rises to the heavens and then it is returned back. But it is suspended before it gets risen if you have unpaid debts. And there are other hadith, hadith I don't think it was mentioned yesterday, but I should have looked it up before, and I'm sure you've heard of it. That there was someone who passed away and he had debts. And then the Prophet ﷺ asked, who will pay this man's debts? And somebody volunteered, paid the debts, and the Prophet ﷺ then said, Al-an baridat jildata, or however he said it, now his skin has cooled, upon the payment of the debt. So it's a very serious issue. So now you may think, well, it's halal to take a loan. No problem with that, with the intention that you're going to pay that back. And if you have that sincere intention and you try to pay it back but you died in poverty, then Allah is most merciful, no doubt. The serious problem is you die not paying your debt because of carelessness. You're not really worried about it. You've been asked to pay it back. You should have paid it back before. You've got the wealth, but you didn't really endeavor to try and earn the wealth to pay it back. That's where the problem is. Okay, so it's a serious issue. If you have a loan upon your death, you need to make sure it's written down in your will at the very least, so that your heirs can pay it back on your behalf. Question?
There's a question here.
Ayub.
Shaykh Ayub has got a question.
So basically, imagine if you have loads of money, but you are married, you have no children, you have no living.
You aren't married. You said you aren't.
You aren't married.
You aren't married.
You don't have any children.
No children.
And no relatives alive.
No relatives.
Alive and no one left from the family.
Yeah, no relatives. Yes, from your family. So what happens?
So what happens to you?
What happens to your money? This was addressed yesterday. You die and you have no relatives. You have nobody, literally no parents, no children, no spouse, no brothers, no sisters, no uncles, no aunties, no grandchildren, no grandparents, nobody alive. Subhanallah. What happens to your wealth?
The Talala.
Sorry?
The ayah of Talala. You said last.
Okay, okay. So in an Islamic country, according to Shara, it goes to Bayt al-Mal, doesn't it? It goes to Bayt al-Mal, Bayt al-Mal Muslimin, goes back to the the Islamic State, and they should have mentioned that word. SubhanAllah, how innocent words have just you can't say anymore. But anyway, yes, it goes to the Islamic State. In this country, if you don't have any relatives who can inherit from you, then please make sure you write a will still and say where you want that wealth to go. Say it goes to charity. There's no Bayt al-Mal, unfortunately, so say it goes to charity. You need to. Otherwise, somebody mentioned it. Where does it go? To the crown, the king and queen. King at the moment. It doesn't go to the king, but it goes to the government. That's what they mean by the crown at the moment. About many years ago, it would have got to the king and the queen. But yeah, good question. Who keeps it?
Like the government.
Yeah, in this country, if you don't have a will and say what you want your wealth, where you want your wealth to go, the government will take it. Unfortunately. So even more reason. What are the debts? Some of these were mentioned yesterday. If you have zakat that you haven't paid, say for the previous year, this is a debt on you by Allah Azza wa Jalla. This is a debt, serious debt. A zakat that you did not pay for whatever reason. I'm not talking about debts, zakat in the future. Khalas, you're dead. So you're not accountable for that. But past zakat, you need to make sure you mention in your will, I didn't pay zakat for my wealth last year. It needs to be paid, this amount. Any mahr that you still owe to your wife, that's a debt to your wife. Don't forget that. Fidya kafara, for whatever reason. There's many reasons why there's kafara, like kafarat yameen. You did a half and you didn't fulfill, and you need to pay kafara or do kafara, then you need to make sure that's mentioned in your will. Or a fidya for fasting. Okay, there are some days that you did fast. Write down that you did fast. I know it's a bit more difficult because how often do you write your will? Well, after Ramadan, you know how many days you've missed. You need to make up. Write it down. Or it could be that you can't fast because of a terminal illness or whatever, or a chronic illness. You don't fast, but you didn't pay the fidya, or the amount you need to pay every day that you haven't fasted. Do not mention it. Write it down. And unperformed obligatory hajj. If you don't have the wealth or the physical ability throughout your life to do hajj, then it was never obligatory upon you in the first place. Unfortunately, hajj these days is ridiculously expensive, and a lot of people simply cannot afford. And if you die upon that state, having not been able to perform it because of no wealth, no health, or whatever, then it was never obligatory. However, if you had the health, you had the wealth, and for whatever reason you procrastinated, laziness, whatever, you need to mention it. Okay, it's really important. It's a debt to Allah Azza wa Jalla. So you mention your unperformed obligatory hajj. That gets taken out of your estate before you give anything to the wasiyah people or the waratha people. These things come first, the debts. Very important. If there's nothing left over after your debts have been paid from your estate, alas, your heirs or the people that you wrote a wasiyah for, they won't get anything because these debts come first. Is that clear? Makes sense. Debts are really, really important to sort out. It's one of the main reasons why you need to write a will. Outstanding taxes and bills. Okay, taxes is a debt to the government. Well, that's still something that you have to make sure that is paid. Bills, gas bills, electricity bills, utility bills, these are a debt to companies. Needs to be paid. This is not really a debt, but a wadi'ah. Someone says, look after this. I mentioned this earlier. This is some money. I want you to look after it. It has different hukm in this sharia. you know, I mean, a loan, if you take a loan out, you need to pay that back. If that money gets lost or whatever, then that's upon your head. But someone gives you something to look after, and you made sure that you looked after it, you weren't careless with it, then obviously that needs to be returned. If it gets stolen, even though you looked after it, it's secured and everything, then according to Islam, that's not your fault. It's not insured. You know, you can't. You know, don't have to worry about it. You know, you made sure it was locked away safely. Someone steals it somehow, it blows up, or fire, or whatever. According to Islam, it doesn't take the same shara as the hukm as a loan, but still, it's still important. Someone gave you something to look after, make sure you write it in your will. Otherwise, your heirs might think it was part of your estate. So these things are very important. The second part I'm going to look at now is the wasiyah part, the bequests. You want to give something to somebody who's not entitled to something according to the shara. Like I said, after all this, we're going to look at the will, the template, and see where all these bits go. But now I'm just going to look at the main part that you should be talking about in your will. Bequests. Do you want to make any bequests? So, after, like I said, all your debts have been paid, your funeral expenses have been looked after, paid for from your estate. These are all things that need to be covered before bequests and wiratha are looked at. Right? So all of that's been done, everything's been accounted for, all your debts and all your expenses for the funeral. You can then decide to give away up to 1/3 of your remaining estate. The famous hadith narrated by Ibn Abbas, it's a long hadith, but this is the important bit, when the Prophet ﷺ said, الثلث والثلث كثير أو كبير. So 1/3, and even then the Prophet ﷺ, this is too much. This is, you know, it's a lot. The maximum you can give is up to 1/3. Ibn Abbas says here, لو غض الناس إلى الربع. If people only kept to a maximum of 1/4, that's good. A maximum of 1/4, because the Prophet was saying ثلث كثير. 1/3 is a lot. You know, perhaps keep it lower than 1/3. But if you wanted to, up to 1/3. So, who can you bequeath to? Anyone who does not receive the prescribed share according to the rules of wiratha, as we said. So you can't bequeath something to your parents. Obviously, if they're alive and you die. You can't say, I want my parents to get this on top of what they're going to get anyway. No, you cannot increase their share. Right? You can bequeath to a charity, to a friend, to a relative that wouldn't get a share, like your brothers or your sisters or your grandparents or whatever. You know, they might indeed end up inheriting something according to the rules of wiratha. You don't know who's going to die or whatever, but you can mention it, and then the executor will say, no, actually this person's still alive, they're going to get a share anyway. So they'll look into that afterwards. But you can say, I want so-and-so to get something, particularly if you know they're not going to receive something according to the rules of wiratha. Or you can bequeath to a charity, or to a friend, or to a non-Muslim even, like a non-Muslim relative, because in Islam, non-Muslims do not get a share according to wiratha. So if you have a non-Muslim child, or a non-Muslim parent, or whatever, you don't get any share according to the prescribed rules. You know, the famous share, some of you may have studied this if you studied the rules of wiratha. وَيُمْنَعُ الشَّخْصَ مِنَ الْمِيرَاثِ وَحِدَةٌ مِنْ عِلَلٍ ثَلَاثِ رِفْقٌ وَقَتْلٌ وَاخْتِلَافُ دِينِ تَفْهَمْ فَلَيْسَ الشَّكُّ كَالْيَقِينِ. One of the reasons, the 3 reasons why someone cannot inherit from you, riq, they are a slave. Okay, we don't have to worry about these things anymore. وَقَتْلٌ, you know, someone who killed you. Right? The person who killed you is not going to inherit according to Islam. وَاخْتِلَافُ دِينِ, they have a different religion to us. They're not Muslim. They will not inherit. You cannot get a prescribed share. So, but you can bequeath. You can bequeath. Again, all of this cannot total up to more than a third. All of these things, anything that you want to give out, cannot total up to more than a third. If the executor, at the end, the person who's going to be distributing this wealth, realizes that your bequeaths have totaled up to more than a third of what you owe, after the debts and everything has been taken care of, then the executor will either have to reduce those bequeaths proportionately, reduce them, knock them down by a certain proportion, so that eventually the total is less than a third, or the executor can try and get those who receive a fixed share to agree to allow those bequests. So those bequests, if those, your waratha, those people who will inherit from you, agree to allow more than a third, then that's okay. But they have to agree. If one doesn't agree, then perhaps their share is not touched, but the others can be reduced if they agree. Part 3. How about the prescribed Islamic shares, the wiratha? The stuff that you don't have to worry about in a Muslim country because that's already enshrined in the laws of the country, because they have Islamic law. So this is wiratha. So after all the debts and expenses have been paid, and up to 1/3 of whatever's left over has been bequeathed, whatever is left over after all of that, this is then distributed, fardan, obligatory, to certain family members according to strict Islamic laws, the laws of wiratha. Ayah in Surah An-Nisa, لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا تَرَكَ لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ مِمَّا قَلَّ مِنْهُ أَوْ كَثُرَ نَصِيبًا مَفْرُوضًا. So for a man or for men is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave behind, and for women is a share of what the parents and close relatives. This was a revolution in Quraysh, when women would not inherit at all. And this was something that, it was new to the Arabs then, that women will inherit. Whether or not, whatever's left over is a little amount or a large amount. Whatever's left over needs to be distributed according to this. This is an obligatory share, nasiban mafruḍa. And then in Surah An-Nisa are multiple ayat which describe what these shares are. And it can get very, very complicated. But like I said, you don't have to worry about this when you're writing your will. All you have to do in this country when you're writing your will is to write down somewhere that you want this remainder to be distributed according to Islamic law. And you leave the worrying about who gets a third or a quarter or whatever to the executor, who will then ask a scholar, or if they know already, they will distribute it according to their knowledge, or use an online calculator or an app, and we will look at this, inshallah, at the end, how you can work this out yourself. Maybe look at some of the maths, if you want, if you're still awake by then. So you don't have to specify what these shares are in your will, or who's going to receive them. Okay, don't worry about that. Leave that to the executor. You can, however, in your will, in your wasiyah, state that you want a specific heir, like a particular child, or your mother, to receive a specific item, or you want your son to receive the car, for example. You can actually say that. That will be part of their share. Okay, so the value of the car needs to be valued, obviously needs to be worked out, and then that becomes part of their prescribed share. So you can say, I want so-and-so to get a specific thing, or a specific amount of money. Of course, if the executor realizes that this is greater than their prescribed share, then the executor can choose either to ignore this request, say, no, I'm going to distribute this according to the shares because the person who died made a mistake here. You know, it's something that's worth more than their prescribed share. So the executor can just ignore that or reduce it. If it's a sum of money, that's easy. But if it's a car, then you know you can't. You have to sell the car and then distribute it according to Islamic law. Or, like we said, if you can get the heirs to agree, that's okay. You can have the car, and therefore what we will get will be a bit less, perhaps. That's okay, so long as everybody agrees.
Got a question here.
Yes.
Shaykh Ayub again.
Okay, Shaykh, are you? Yes.
You know, it's that if the murderer was like...
If the murderer... Is that what you said? Go on, okay.
If the murderer was none other than your own, like one of the, like, you know, if you wanted to give, like, the money to your friends, some of them to your friends and say be, like, very close to you.
But this friend then murdered you?
Yeah, so the anger, like, the cruel.
Okay.
And no, nobody knows about it.
Nobody knows?
Nobody knows this thing, like, soon as murdered him, it's not this person, can't be him, he's an innocent person, he could have done that to his friend.
Right, if nobody knows who the murderer is, then obviously the executor won't know, and they'll distribute it according to the wishes of the deceased. If this person receives the wealth,
It's haram.
I'm not 100% sure, because this person who killed the deceased, won't be somebody who gets a prescribed share anyway. And as I said, يمنع شخصا من الميراث. A person is denied their share of the wiratha, according to the prescribed rules, if they kill the person. But this friend doesn't get a prescribed share anyway, they're not a family member. So it's not part of wiratha. So shar'an, should this person, the murderer, get this thing that was bequeathed to them? Perhaps not. The qadi, I'm not 100% sure, but I would assume that the qadi would say, no, you killed the person, because someone who would get a prescribed share doesn't get anything, and why should someone who is bequeathed something should get something as well? But again, it's a question that the qadi should answer.
Even if he gets the money, is it haram?
Again, like I said, the exact hukm, I'm not 100% sure. If the qadi says no, we will make the hukm the same as if this person gets a prescribed share, then it would be haram. Okay? Forget about the money, this person needs to be, anyway, dealt with accordingly. Yes?
The executor could be anybody from your family.
Inshallah, we'll get to that. Good question. Good question. But we'll get to the who can the executor be. Executor, I don't mean executioner, you know, obviously. But we'll talk about this, but good question. More on this at the end, okay, when we look at the Islamic calculator. Something to mention in your will, and again mentioned by Qadi Zakallah yesterday, is your funeral arrangements. Really important in this country, particularly if you have family members who are not Muslim, or you are the only Muslim in your family, even more so. Because, you know, if you don't write this in your will, you don't have a will, your family are going to decide how you get buried, where you get buried, and so on. So it's extremely important, more so. So specify in your will, and we'll see where this goes in your will, you know, how you wish your funeral to progress, how you want your burial to be conducted, obviously according to Islamic Sharia, the funeral prayer and the burial. You may want to add certain things, and we'll talk about this in the template, that you don't want any routine post-mortem or autopsy, same thing I think. So, you know, the doctor might say, look, it's best if we do a post-mortem. No, you don't. Okay, you don't want a post-mortem just because, you know, the doctor's interested or they think it's a good idea. The hadith narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Kasru azmi al-mayyiti ka kasrihi hayya." So when breaking the bone of a believer, or sorry, of a dead person, is as though you broke his bone while he was alive. And obviously when they do a post-mortem, they're going to cut you up, probably, break apart your chest, your bones in your chest. Just cutting you up is bad enough when there's no reason for it. So state in your will, they say, look, it's really needed. No, the person does not want this to be done, so don't do it. You want the body to be released immediately. Sometimes it's beyond your control, especially in this country. Things are progressing, but not fast enough, unfortunately. But try and get the body released as fast as possible and buried without delay. If members of the family say, no, we want to hang about in the fridge for another week because we want so-and-so to come over from God knows where to be present. No, don't allow that. The body should be buried as soon as possible, according to the Sunnah. Make sure it's written in your will, so that that family member is overwritten, and say, no. They have said specifically that this person wishes to be buried immediately. State that you want to be buried close to your family, where you are, where you died, essentially. Obviously, if you died in a different city, it's easy for you to be transported, from one city to the next in this country. So you might want to say, I want to be buried close to where my family live in this country. It's not advisable to say, I want to be transported to my home country or to a different country to be buried. To be transport a body, and certain things have to happen. Sometimes it's evisceration. The doctor, the guy, disappeared. Sometimes they'll empty your organs, in order for your body to be transported by plane. And they will empty your body of blood and fill it up with alcohol and all sorts. And the delay and all sorts. Why do you want all of that? It doesn't matter where you're buried at the end of the day, it's what you are buried with. So, you should really insist that you get buried, close to where you died. Yes? Is an autopsy haram? Well, in this country, the law might insist, particularly when the person dies for no apparent reason, you're murdered or whatever, or they don't know why you died, they want to look at the circumstances. Was this person murdered? Sometimes it's beyond your control. And they will force upon the family that they will perform an autopsy. But if it's not enforced, if it's not obligatory, then no. And then back home, usually you can convince them no. But in this country, I'm afraid sometimes it's beyond your control. In which case, no, plus.
There's a question there.
Is
Can you will be forced to die abroad?
and you will be
Enforced if you die abroad?
if you die abroad. As far as I'm aware, your UK assets, your will still be enforced. So you die abroad, you have a will legally recognised in the UK. As far as I'm aware, it will be enforced. Where you die, I don't think would be an issue at all. There are issues where you might have assets abroad. But if you have questions about that, maybe see me afterwards. All right. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Organ donation. A lot of people don't want their organs donated. Some people have already stipulated on the organ donation or the organ donor register. I think I have. This is easy to do. You go onto the website and say, I don't want my organs, donated. Or you can stipulate it in your will that you don't want your organs donated. Unfortunately, recently, I think it's in 2014 in this country, they've enforced an opt-out system. Basically, your organs, if no one says anything about it, the law says they can remove your organs. Before it was opt-in, you have to say, look, written somewhere, take my organs. But if they don't have that okay, then they won't touch you. But now the law is, if nobody objects, the family doesn't get involved. you've not stated it in your will, they can take your organs. So, of course, if you mention that the executor should do something in particular with the wealth that's left over for these kids, what happens to it is invested. Obviously, if it's invested, you need to mention it's invested in a halal way. What is it spent on? You might want to say, look after them, obviously the basic needs, but their education as well. You might want to say, look, I want this child to be taught privately or whatever. You know, mention these things. Obviously, until the kids are old enough to take ownership of their own inheritance, but up until then, you might want to say what you want the executor to do with their wealth. Who is the executor? It's an important question. So this person that you need to name in your will has a legal responsibility. Okay, according to the law, they are legally obliged to carry out the wishes as stated in your will. It can be a family member. It can be your wife or your husband. In a lot of cases it is. I think I put down that my wife is my executor. Not executioner. Okay. But it can be anybody. It could be your adult child, or a friend that you trust, or another relative, or a solicitor. But they charge a lot for doing this sort of thing, to distribute your wealth and so on. They charge quite a lot. Whoever it is, choose them wisely. All right, discuss with them. Make sure they understand what it means to be an executor. It's quite a responsibility. Okay, it's not something, especially if it's a complicated case. It's best if they know about your situation and what assets you have, and what's the business environment, and so on. What will they do? These are the main duties. They will locate the will. They will find where this will is. Obviously, you have told them, okay, the will is in my house, or you might leave the will with the executor, or leave a copy with them, and then they'll come back and take the original out. Or they might have, you might have two original copies, both signed properly, and so on. Usually there's only one original copy, however. But they need to know where the will is. If it's hidden and nobody finds it, then it's useless. It might be kept with a solicitor. That sometimes happens. It might be kept at the bank. Sometimes they offer that service. What else will they do? They will notify the banks, your employer, your utility companies, your gas, electric, your telephone, your whatever, your insurance companies, car insurance and all sorts. They will inform them that this person has passed away. They will cancel all the direct debits, standing orders. Otherwise they'll be coming out for things that are useless now. Okay. Now, one thing that is useful, if you want to, that your pension to be stopped and your state benefits to be stopped, government payments, if you want those to be stopped easily, it's best to use the government's Tell Us Once service. It's a website. You go there, you tell them once that this person has died, and they will do a lot of cancelling for you. They will inform these departments, these government departments, that you have passed away. So you don't have to go and contact each one of them. So they will, make sure all your benefits are stopped and everything. But you'll also, and also they'll cancel your passports, your car registration documents, because these are all government agencies. So the Tell Us Once website will make sure that all these departments are informed that you have passed away. So it's good that the executor uses this service, otherwise they'll have a lot more work. What else will they do? They will value your estate. This is an important aspect of it. They will figure out how much is in your bank accounts. What your properties are worth, your cars and so on, and come up with a total. And if it transpires that it's above the threshold of £325,000, or there, if it's a will that has been written in a basic form, like we're going to show, transpires that you've actually got more than that, then if you haven't sorted things out properly with the solicitor, then your executor will have to pay the inheritance tax, so 40% above that threshold. Obviously, they don't pay it out of their own pocket. They can choose to do so and then get it back from the estate, but usually it's paid out of the person's estate, of course. If they pay it out of their own pocket, then they can claim this back. That's no problem, of course. The executor will collect all the assets, maybe take all the money from the bank. You might agree with the bank that you open up an executor's account so that you can put everything in there that you have access to. Banks will do that, create an executor's account for you. Or you might transfer everything into an account in your name as the executor. Probably best to keep it away from your own accounts. Okay, a separate account. You can easily open up multiple accounts in a bank. Keep everything there, separate from yours. If there's a property involved, sometimes the bank accounts, so long as you can say, you can prove you're the executor, because you've got the will, or your relatives are there, then they will say, okay, here's access to the account. Some banks have different thresholds and say no, because there's quite a bit in this account, or their rules in that bank are different. They might say no, we want probate. What is that? Probate is the act of you getting permission from government to take control of the deceased assets. And you log on, I'm not going to go through the details of it, but if you need to get probate because the bank is saying they want the power of probate, or there's a property involved, the land registry isn't just going to say, yeah, here's the deeds, put them under your name. No, they will say, no, we'll need probate. It's a property. So how do you get probate? Pretty straightforward. Go to the website, government website, online application for probate, put all your details in there. Obviously you need to provide death certificate, the will. They end up having a copy of the will which clearly states that you're the executor, and eventually, hopefully not too long after that, you'll get probate, and that's it. You've got access to everything then. Right? If you've got probate, well, sometimes it's not needed at all. Okay? But in a lot of circumstances it might well be, particularly if there's a lot of wealth or property involved, businesses or whatever. Executor will pay off debts once they've got power of your, over your accounts and everything. They'll pay off any debts, and hopefully, inshallah, distribute the wealth according to your bequeaths, your wasiyah, and then whatever's left over will distribute the rest according to the rules of wiratha. Okay, so they'll need to make sure that they understand all this stuff, or get an expert, a scholar, or whatever to help them. So that, in a nutshell, is what the executor will do. So again, choose them wisely, make sure that they understand. Don't just say, brother, can you be the executor? And say, yeah, I'll do that. And they're clueless as to what's involved. Alright? So make sure they understand what's involved. Your will needs to be witnessed according to English law, according to Islamic law. According to English law, the witnesses have to be 2, and they must be over 18. In Islamic law, they have to be 2 trustworthy men, Muslim men, who witness your will. If that's not possible, then 2 non-Muslim trustworthy men, preferably Muslim, but if you can't find someone to witness your will, then 2 non-Muslim men. If you want a woman or women to witness your will, then 2 women, as we know, can act as a witness instead of 1 man. Right? So 4 women instead of 2 men, or 2 women and 1 man, according to Islamic law. This is very important, extremely important in the UK in particular, that anyone who will benefit from your will, whether it's from a bequeath, a wasiyah, or from the rules of wiratha, they cannot be witnesses. Right? This is extremely important. If they are witnesses, they can be witnesses. You can actually put them down as a witness. But if they are, then they will not be allowed to benefit from anything in your will. Alright? So any witnesses, make sure that they are not going to receive anything from your estate, not by bequeathal or bequest or the wiratha. So they cannot be a beneficiary. And it's also a good idea that you don't get the spouse of a beneficiary to witness either, because this can be disputed in a court of law. Say, well, actually, this beneficiary, it was their spouse who witnessed it, and therefore there's a conflict of interest. They might have made it up because they wanted a portion of the wealth or whatever. So best not to have a spouse yourself.
How would death in service work out? Like, say, for example, company gives a
Pension, lump sum.
lump sum if you die in service. How would that be? I mean,
Where does-
incorporated into
As far as I'm aware, the question was, so if you have a private pension or company pension, a lot of them do say that if you die in service, so you're still employed and you die before you've retired, that they will give a chosen person, someone that you've chosen, usually your spouse, a lump sum, maybe 3 times your salary or whatever. Well, according to my understanding, this becomes part of your estate. It doesn't, Islamically, the law says no, it goes to the person that you've written, or you've recorded with the private pension provider. The law says it will go to that person. But really, in Islamic law, that becomes part of your estate. You paid into that. You paid into that private pension. You've been building it up. So when you die, it's then basically given back to you or whatever. I think, as far as I'm aware, it becomes part of your estate and should be distributed according to Islamic law. And whoever gets it, receives it, because they were written as the person with the state, or the private pension. If they receive it, like your spouse, it's upon that person to think, well, actually, it's not really my wealth. It's as part of the state, it needs to be distributed, and therefore they should take it upon themselves to distribute it accordingly.
If you're not in a private pension, and it just give you a lump sum for your service and death in service, how would that work?
Right. No comment as far as I'm aware. I mean, it gets a bit complicated. I mean, they basically gifted you something that you didn't pay into yourself. It's a gift, but you're dead.
So,
Yes, sir.
I think the death in service is tied up with your pension. Some of those schemes are tied up with your pension as well, through your work.
What about if you don't have a pension, but you still get a death in the service?
I think you might need to check with your firm. They give something to you to
It's a lump sum.
What about if up to that, you don't want really the money when they in their pension, they invest in young ones.
I think there are lots of...
pension, which is quite
Yeah.
difficult.
He's right. So you work for a company. What they do is if you die while you're working for them,
They'll give you a lump sum. They'll give you a lump sum.
without your pension,
The question is, for us, what happens to that?
that lump sum then goes to your spouse or your family.
Yes, it does. According to law.
Yeah.
According to...
Well, the company,
Yeah.
to your family, and say this is your spouse.
I would assume that this becomes part of your estate Islamically and needs to be distributed according to your wishes, because it's part of your estate.
Obviously, you wouldn't have that either in the first place, do you?
You might do. No, you might do. It's something that you should mention. You should mention that you have a pension, or you have... Yeah, absolutely. Mention these things as part of your assets, as we'll see that in a short while. So, after everyone signed the will, keep it safe. Let the executor know where it is. You might want to make a copy, get the copies signed, and keep one with you and one with the executor, so long as people know where it is. Now, this is more or less my final slide. you'll see on the handouts that what I've done is I've put links to the template that we're going to look at now, or you can use your camera to scan that, because obviously you're not going to be typing that in, are you? You can scan the QR code with your camera if you want to access the template, which we'll look at now, inshallah.
Just a point.
Yes.
Would you leave that slide on so after the talk, if anybody wants to take pictures of it?
Yeah, inshallah, no problem. What I'll do is I'll also email you or WhatsApp you the slides.
Yeah.
You can hand it out. We'll send it to people. Or via conductor. Things crush on you sometimes.
Our video recording is live.
Sorry, brother?
Video recording.
Of this?
I mean,
Yeah.
when you're writing your work,
Yeah.
it didn't have to be written, so video recording wouldn't be recording of someone's will or wishes wouldn't be acceptable.
No, that's problem. So, but the only allowance they've made because of COVID recently was that you can sign it via video conferencing, but the witnesses are watching you across the internet and you're signing it. But then this has to be then sent over to those witnesses and they have to sign it in front of you. So the signing can take place across the internet virtually, but still it has to be physically signed on a piece of paper. So here, this is a template which has been flying around for many years.
Can't see properly.
Yeah, I'll expand it, inshallah, I'll expand it. And this is the one that we've got access to now, inshallah. I've put a link to it. And it has all the bits and pieces that we've been talking about. And like I said, this is suitable for a lot of people, even if you have no wealth, or up to £325,000. If you have no wealth at all, then at least talk about your funeral arrangements and whatever. So I would type in here my name. Obviously I'll get rid of these dots or whatever. Date it, whatever the date is today. Number one, mention that you are revoking all your previous will. We talked about that. But this is my final will. Nothing else. Even if it's an old will, someone comes, no, actually you mentioned me in here. No, there's a new will. Declaration of faith. It's not needed, but this is a good place to put a message to your heirs, your children, your father, your whatever. This is, it talks about the akhirah, to remind those people who are left behind. You might want to put a private message to your family there. Sometimes the kids don't listen to you while you're alive. Maybe one after death will be more poignant and hit them harder, perhaps. So you could put a private message in here to your loved ones. Talk about the akhirah. Tell them what you want them to do as they grow up, and what you want them to have as their priorities in life, and not to forget the akhirah. Number 3, funeral wishes. So, like we said before, you want your ghusl, your janazah, your dafn to be done Islamically. You don't want an autopsy to be performed on the body. Is that still small, of course? If possible, instead of an autopsy, you can have an MRI scan, if that's okay. Sometimes, like I said, it's sometimes out of your hand, but at least you've mentioned it there. Say that you want, to be buried close to where you died, or be more specific and say, no, in this particular cemetery, if possible, or whatever. Guardianship. Okay, so if you have children under the age of 18, say that you would like a particular person to be looking after them. You might want to mention your spouse, first of all, okay, just in case. or you can put your spouse, and then you can say, or, you know, or if they're unwilling, then I want so and so. You can mess about with this as much as you want. Put a list of people. If this doesn't want, you know, doesn't want to take responsibility, then this person and this person. Mention who the executor is. Now, usually you put a number of them. You could say all of them they can be executors, so they all help one another. Or you might want to say, I want to appoint so and so, or instead of and, you might want to say or so and so, and say in that order of preference. So if the first person isn't going to accept, even though you've told them and they said they're okay with it, but then, you know, come to when they realise what's involved, they say, no, please. Or they can't do it, they might have passed away. It's good to have a list of people. So you can put as many people as you want here. It's best to have at least 2. This is where it's mentioned that, you know, you want your trustees, your executors, to then take responsibility, you know, to take over all your property after your death, and they can then sell, you know, if it's property or it's possessions, you know, they can convert that to money, perhaps, at a time that's suitable to the executors. Okay, it might be that it's not suitable to sell the house now because they're living in it, and they agree that no, actually we'll stay living in this until whatever, maybe until perhaps the mother passes away because she's still living there, and then it's easier to distribute the wealth after you sell the house. So long as, you know, they understand, these are your executors, you know, they should understand the circumstances, particularly if it is your spouse, they will understand what's best to do. So you're not saying that they have to do this, sell it straight away and distribute straight away. No, you're giving them power to sell at a time which is convenient. They might want to postpone doing so. And then whatever is in your estate will then be held in what's known as the trust fund in this will. So we're going to call everything the trust fund. There's a lot of legal jargon in here. Lots of legal jargon. Like I said, it's not really necessary, but the solicitors, they, you know, are very particular. If you write your will and you just say, look, distribute it according to Islamic law, whatever's left over, then that should be okay. But it's best to be as legally precise as you possibly can. I've put here that it's best to put your debts and say, look, you know, I've mentioned here that I give all the residue of my estate, out of which funeral expenses and my debts will be paid. See point or clause 6.2, and 6.2 here is where you're going to mention any debts. If there's no debts, you write none. List your debts. I owe so and so this amount of money. Or you might want to mention things that people have entrusted with you. Actually, this bank account, the wealth in there is actually so and so's. It's not actually mine. It wasn't a loan, but they've entrusted it to me. So mention all these things, all your debts. In part 7 here, this is where you are mentioning that you want the remainder of your wealth to be distributed according to bequests and wiratha. So it's saying here that subject to clause 7.2, and this is where you put the wasiyah, the bequests, as we mentioned in the slides. After the bequests have been dealt with, you want your trustees to then distribute the remainder of the trust fund according to Islamic law, and your trustees will have the responsibility to make sure that that is done, you know, but in their discretion, of course. They've been told to use Islamic law, so they will do so, inshallah. But here, of course, 7.2 is where you can put your bequests. Say, well, actually, I want so and so, who's a friend of mine, or my cousin, or whatever, to get this amount, or whatever, or to keep my computer or whatever you want to distribute, or any donations. If you don't want any bequests at all, just, write none. Right? Don't leave these blank in case your executor then starts filling it in by hand or whatever. Right? Just get rid of it. Just delete the whole thing. Right? Or write no bequests. Okay? Or whatever.
So,
Yes, Afi.
where would you write the value, like the 1/3 or the 1/4?
We'll get to that inshallah. Okay? So these are bequests, things you want to give to specific people, or donations you want to make to charity. And then in this point here, you're then saying the remainder gets distributed according to Sharia. Notice we're not mentioning a third or a fourth or a quarter here at all. Finally, I'm going to have to adjust this because I think the spacing has been moved around. This is just legal jargon again. This is basically where it gets signed. So you sign it here. Okay, you printed it out, obviously no one's doing it on a computer. You printed it out, written it with ink, and you've written or you've typed here that it's signed by me, Nabeil. Okay, I've inserted my full name. And then you're signing it in front of the two witnesses. So they will sign here. Who's the sign witness? Saleh, whatever.
Saleh.
Ahmed. They write their name. Type their name or write their name, doesn't really matter. Saleh Muhammad. Address 22. Whatever. Huh? Reading Lane. Okay, and again Ahmed. Full name. Okay, Ahmed Saleh, son of Saleh. No. And the address, maybe the occupation, and that's it, signed and done and dusted. Okay. Yes, Afi.
Can we use DocuSign? Because DocuSign makes
I would avoid any electronic, as far as I'm aware, avoid all electronic forms of signatures and things like this. Physical signature, witnessed by those people. Okay, you don't want to leave anything to chance. As far as I'm aware, it has to be done pen on paper for it to be legally valid in England. Yes?
When the
Executor, yeah, executes the will.
Yeah. So, say for example, he sees some sort of
Injustices according to Islamic law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or between brothers and
Yes.
sisters or whatever. So can he intervene this will because it's been written now and signed?
Yeah, of course. If Islamic law has been broken, because, for example, there was a bequeathal to someone who gets a share Islamically, then the executor, according to Islamic law, can say, no, this is not going to happen. We're going to nullify that bequest because they already get a share. Not unless he or she can get all the heirs to agree to this to happen. Okay, but Islamically, he can just say, no, it's not going to happen. It's not allowed to happen. Okay? So, yeah.
Saleh is the one, is the person called the fine
Yeah? No, that's Shaykh Umar.
No, like his son Saleh.
I don't.
There's a question there.
It can't be because it's too young. It needs to be 18 years old. Yes? Ah, right, okay. That's true, that's true. Where would I put it? If they are someone who gets a prescribed share Islamically, I would mention it in the bequests personally.
And mention that.
Mention it. And you could say that this person would probably get a fixed share anyway.
But the reason I mention it is
Yes.
let's say someone owns an investment account and they have shares in the investment
Yes.
own shares.
They have shares.
And so what happens after that? Can you, for example, say at the point of death it's worth that much, that person takes over it, a specific heir takes the account.
Yeah.
You have to say it has to be sold, and then all the shares have to be sold, and then they have to be sold.
According to where it's written here, it's up to the trustees, the executor, or the executors, we call trustees as well, to determine what happens to these shares. Are they sold? And usually they would just sell them off. Okay, it's probably the best thing to do. You can mention here what you want them to do, but if it's not possible, then it's up to them to make sure it's, whatever happens, it's distributed Islamically. Okay, that's a quick and short answer to that one. Okay, so that's the will, signed by everybody. Although it's not part of the will legally, it's best to mention your assets. So at the end, you'd mention what your assets are. You'd put your name, again, as my name, of 22 Aubrey Road or whatever, and I'd say my assets, house on 22 Aubrey Road. Okay, full address. Car, reg number, bank accounts, number, sort code, bank name, and so on. Yes?
You know that these assets changes regularly, like every month, assets go up, come down. You need to make the will every month.
What sort of assets are these? Properties?
House or anything, anything.
Well, when it comes to the time for distribution, if it becomes, the executor will have to sell the property.
Now, but you are saying you need to mention the asset on the will.
Yeah, we're mentioning the assets now.
So what I'm saying,
Yes.
for example, my assets, this month I got house and next month I don't have house. The following month I got again. So I like a business purpose, like asset goes up and comes down. So we can make the will for every month.
You can update your will regularly. Of course, getting the witnesses, it becomes a big task. Now, you don't have to mention your assets. The executor will find out what your assets are at some point. But it's best to mention them as best as you possibly can here to make the life of the executor as easy as possible. Otherwise, they'll have a lot of legwork to do to try and figure out what all your assets are. But you mention all your bank accounts and everything here, everything that you own, you'll mention here. So, your pensions, what your pension number is if you have a private pension. So you'll mention all of that here. Sorry, I should have mentioned it here, shouldn't I? So all of these assets, that's just your name, and then you can list your assets there, and that's more or less it. Yes, sir.
Practically, it's going to take a lot of time. Is it permissible for someone to pay for the funeral, get all that done, get the body buried, and then they can sort that out?
Of course, this is not going to happen until after the person's dead and buried.
It's because you said you're supposed to use the dead person's money to pay for the funeral.
Yeah,
but
you can. If you could get access to it.
Yeah, if you can't, then someone else pay for it.
Yes, of course. What does the executor have to do? He has to sort out the shares. Yes, I think.
Once you understand the will, where do you keep
Where do you keep
it?
the will? As I mentioned earlier, the executor needs to know where it is. Okay, so either it's kept with the executor safely, or you keep it yourself and you let people know where it is. Wherever it is, let people know, especially the executor, where this will is held. Okay, you might have a copy of it with the executor and one with you. Right? But it's probably best to just have the one, and everyone knows where it is. Okay, so long as people know where it is.
How many copies you are allowed?
The advice is that you only have one will, because then things can happen, people could stop messing about with copies that they might have. You have one will, that it's kept safely, then that's probably best. But have as many copies as you want, right? How does the executor work at the wills Islamically? So they've distributed everything, they've paid off all the debts, they've made all the bequests. What's left over needs to be distributed Islamically. I've mentioned in the slides that, you know, I put other, I mean, that's one of the, by the way, let me just explain here that there is the template that we've been going through. This is it's based on this template. There's a lot more advice here written by some specialists. These slides are also here. You can scan that. But also, yesterday's recording, I'll put it on YouTube. I didn't manage to sort that out. It's available there if you want to watch the recording from yesterday. I'll also put this recording, the recording of this presentation here. So once you've got a copy of the updated slides, I will put the link here and the QR code. Also here, I'll put a link to a calculator for Islamic shares. There's many of these. You can even download them on your phone as an app. You know, there's quite a few of them, but it's best to use websites that even solicitors use. Okay, and these two are very good. These two that I've mentioned here. Let's have a quick look. I don't know if I've got internet connection. Oh, it's broken off, the internet connection. But anyway, this is one example. The second one, I've managed to download. This final one is actually downloadable here. So the second of the two, I actually prefer the first one, but I don't have internet at the moment. But in this one, you can say I have one son, one daughter perhaps. Let's just say I have no parents, I have a wife. Let's keep things simple, yeah? No brothers, no sisters, and so on. Even if I say I've got brothers, okay, and 2 sisters, they're not going to inherit because I've got children anyway, and so on. And you can carry on, half brothers, paternal brothers, and so on. You can even mention in this one which madhab, because there are subtle differences in some of the madahis, but generally speaking they agree. So once you've done that, actually, you know what, let's just try and work this out ourselves. So what have I got? This is me. I have a wife, I have a son and a daughter, and this is, and you know, forget my grandchildren, but you know, you can mention them. Even if I have other uncles, they want to know. Let's just keep things simple here. You can mention everybody in these websites. But how much would my wife get if I were to die, and I've got children?
1/6.
It's an 8, isn't it? If I have no children, she'll get 1/4, but she will get an 8. And then what happens to the remaining 7/8? It gets distributed amongst my children in a ratio of 2 to 1. So that 7/8, the 7/8 needs to be divided into how many shares? 3. Why 3? Because the ratio is 2 to 1. You know, forget about the math, the calculator will work it out anyway. But the son will get twice the daughter, so there's 3 shares. 1 share for the daughter and 2 shares for the son. So this will have to be divided into 3 parts. So essentially, this 7/8, each part is really 7/24, mashallah. Okay? 7/24, the son will get 14 out of, mashallah, 14 out of 24 of my wealth, and the daughter will get 7/24. So we've actually divided our wealth into 24ths. So an 8, what is that in 24ths? That's the same as 3/24ths, isn't it? If you remember your calculation. So all my wealth gets divided into 24 parts. My wife will get 3 of those 24 parts. My son will get 14 out of the 24 parts, and my daughter will get 7/24ths. Right, so that is actually, it cancels down to what? 7 over 12, and that's it, isn't it? So these are the basic splits. Let's see what the calculator says. This is correct, isn't it? Let's calculate. Is that correct?
Yes.
The son gets 7/12, the daughter gets 7/24, and the wife gets 1/8. And you can work out that as percentages. 7 divided by 12 in your calculator, 7 divided by 24 in your calculator, 1/8 is divided by. So calculators can do most of the way. If you have a very complicated situation, it's best to get a scholar involved, because sometimes the calculators won't be able to differentiate subtleties. For example, you only have daughters, okay? Because my son passed away, but my son has kids. Will my grandchildren, the children of my kids, get my deceased son's shares if I only have daughters left over? Yes. I do. It's the last link. The one that I just used is the last link. So let me repeat that. Let me repeat that. Just to. So I die. This is me. Okay. I have a daughter. I had a son, but he passed away. But this son had a grandchild, my grandchild, this is the relations to me, grandson, and another grandson, let's just say. Will my grandchildren inherit? Yes, in this situation, even though grandchildren usually don't inherit, but if you only have daughters and not sons, these grandchildren here will inherit the share of the deceased son. If, however, I had another son who's still alive, will these grandchildren inherit? According to the Sunnah, no. Because the son that's still alive here is a hajib. Right? They prevent these grandchildren, according to Islamic law, from inheriting anything. However, if there was no son, and there was only a daughter alive, these grandchildren will inherit what would have been the son's share here. You can't mention this in these calculators. Because when you mention grandchildren, it assumes they are grandchildren of people who are alive. And they won't inherit. Yes?
In this situation, in the case like this, it is best to do the wasiya, like 1/3 up to 1/3, without clubbing.
You can. Or speak to the executor and tell him, look, this is a complicated situation. Now, if you wanted, let's just say in this situation there was a son, still alive. Islamic law says these grandchildren inherit nothing in Islamic law. However, you're still alive, you do want these grandchildren to inherit something. What do? You bequeath part of your 1/3 that you're free to do whatever you want with. You can say, I want these grandchildren to get something. Mention what that something is. Or say that you want them to get what my son would have got. Okay? And that's okay, so long as whatever this share is no more than 1/3. Yes, I think so.
So, going back to the point, so if I pass away, my wife gets his share first, and the balance from that goes to the kids and children.
Correct. Yeah, so, this 8 is a fixed share. Okay? What the children get isn't fixated. Okay, you don't know. Now, at any one time, perhaps, you can't say it's going to be a 6. It might be a 6 for one child, or 7/12 for a different family who has a son as well. So sons and children don't have a fixed share. It's calculated from the remainder of whatever's left over, because there are fixed shares. Also, parents have a fixed share. So if there were parents here, mother and father, how much would they get each? A 1/6. This is fard. So you've worked out the 6 for father, mother, an 8 for the wife. Now whatever's left over gets distributed amongst the kids. But like I said, you don't have to be a maths expert. You can use a calculator, get it checked by a Shaykh or a faqih who knows these things. It's all okay, particularly if it's complicated, like we said earlier. and then the executor can then bang in the calculator what the amounts are.
What happens if you've got 2 wives and 3 wives?
2 wives, 3 wives.
My father left behind 3 wives and
So the wife,
does it get the first wife, get the first option first, and the second in?
so there's another wife here. Oh my God. What happens? What happens, anybody?
8.
Ah. It's an 8 for all of them together. So really they're going to get how much each of your wealth? 16. Half of an 8. Okay? So if you have 3 wives, you divide it by 3, that, yeah, 8 by 3.
Is there a priority of who gets which first? For example, let's say, is there priority?
Well, like I said, you sort out what's fard. These are furood. These are furood. Okay, so 6 there, and 8 there. You sort those out. Whatever's left over, it will be distributed amongst what's known as the asaba. These people who then share out whatever's remaining after the fixed, the actual fixed shares. So it's shared out according to principles like a son gets twice as much as a daughter. This will all be calculated in those online calculators. These situations, I'll tell you exactly what each son will get if there's 20 sons even. We'll work it out. Obviously, you get 20 sons, they're not going to get much each, but that's the way it is. If there are lots of children, then the parents and the wife will be a lot well off. So they get fixed shares. If you have lots of kids, whatever's left over is going to have to be distributed amongst them. Any other questions? I think oh my God, it's 10 o'clock. I do apologize for spending too long on this. Like I said, it's all on there. We'll stop at that. The only question, I couldn't check on Slido because my internet's down. But inshallah, we'll stop at that. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum.